Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the cutting room floor. Today we are joined by Vincent Disanti. He's the creative genius behind the wildly successful 2017 Friday the 13th fan film Never Hike Alone, with a prequel and three future installments having just been announced. Mr. Disanti, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Thanks for, I got to thank you for coming on. Well, personally, never a very big fan of Never Hike Alone, so it's great to be talking to you. We had Andrew on the show before,
Oh
right
yeah?
before you guys announced the future installments, and I knew he almost let it out.
Oh, I don't doubt it. That guy's got loose lips. I know. I know him. He's probably teasing things, saying stuff. No, I love Andrew. It's good. He must have been fun to have on.
Oh no, he was great. Within the first 15 seconds, he said his balls were sweating.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Did he wear his hat?
He did wear his hat, but I think he had it on
All
back.
right. All right. Well, I got it on forward. Yeah, he got me this hat because he wiped my other hat on his nuts. Actually, it's this hat right here.
I
This
saw
is the
that
one.
video that on Facebook.
Yeah. So we went on a little, anybody who's in our Never Hike Alone group has seen us go on our little, we've been doing it since the beginning of the project, and people are just starting to catch on. Like, him and I go to war in the comments on each other and always pick on each other. So I'm glad people are finally catching on and seeing kind of like what life is on set with us.
Oh no, that's always great to see. You guys definitely have what a lot of people call like a feuding bromance. So I think that's
Mm.
always great comedy.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Have you always been like a big fan of horror?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up a big horror fan. My mom read a lot of Stephen King. She watched a lot of horror movies, and I was always, I used to see her like Stephen King books on the shelf, and so I'd always kind of like peek in and look at them and read pieces of them and stuff like that. And I didn't understand them because I was so young. And then I saw that similar type of, aesthetic with the horror genre when we started watching movies as I was a kid. And so that's really what led to it. It was like cover art and box art and VHS art that was all kind of enticing because it looked dangerous and, oh, what is that? I want to know what that is. And one of the things that fell on my lap through that was Friday the 13th. I just remember seeing the hockey mask on some of the covers and being drawn to that, and then being kind of classic case of like too young to really know the franchise. I discovered Jason first, and then I went back and discovered Pamela and watched the films in order and all that stuff. But I mean, it was really just a love for like scary movies.
What was so you watched them all in chronological order?
I watched them all out of order, and then I watched them in chronological order.
What was the first one you saw?
I always, I don't know. I think it's part 7 was the first one I saw. Because I remember the intro, and I remember seeing all the entries to the films, and seeing all these like moments. And so I remember like I had seen part 7, and then I started watching all the other films, and I remembered the moments from each of the films that it took from. So like part 2 with like Sackhead jumping up in the darkness with like the spear, or Ted White bursting through the door, or like a lot of the stuff with C.J. Graham. I think that's like in part 7 with part 6 with him rising from the grave and stuff like that, and Tom Matthews, and him being a big part of that prequel thing that they always put in the front of Fridays. So I think that was what it was, and I kind of got this like intense like download of what Friday the 13th was, and then I started renting all the tapes. But this is back in the day when Friday the 13th was like really popular, like really really popular. So anytime you wanted to go to the store to rent it, it was always rented out. So you had to go with what was left, and so like I had to bounce around. I could never watch. It took me a long time to watch them in order. I'll just say that.
If you had to pick a favorite and a least favorite of the franchise, what would those be?
My favorite is part 6, with part 4 being a close second. Like my top 3 are, it's 6, 4, 2. Like those I think are like the 3 best in the series as far as like execution and scares and just overall character and all that stuff. Like those are the ones that really stand out to me. The one that I like the least is the 2009 remake, because I think it's a lazy movie. I think it's a lazy $20 million movie. For $20 million, I just expected something a little bit more cohesive and less kind of backyard school movie, where it was just kind of, I don't know. I didn't really vibe with that film. I thought Derek Mears made a great Jason. I think my biggest gripe with it is that it was vastly underutilized. With the budget they had, they could have done so much more.
I would agree with you on the budget of those side, and I would agree with you with the favorite films, but you gotta disagree. I love me some Jared Padalecki.
Mm. But I feel like I don't know. I feel like the direction of his character in that film, and like it's just very moody, and he's very moody, and it's not him. I mean, if it was about if the film was about him and they really focused on him, and it wasn't so like cliche, like him going to the door and him being like, you don't know where to walk, and it was just very like, I've seen these scenes 1,000 times before. I saw that same scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre by the same director, and so I don't know. I expected them to go a little bit further with their storytelling, and the fact they came up with all these teens who really had nothing to do and were just sitting around and had no arcs and were just I don't know. I just felt like they just kind of weighed everything on the tropes rather than try and find something interesting to say with the franchise and bring it into like today's to bring it into. I mean, think about how sophisticated a lot of like the horror films are today. Not all of them. I think indie horror gets away with a lot, but franchise horror needs to really connect and like bridge into the next films. And I don't think that 2009 was a well-built machine to really lead into the next movie. It was very clunky and sloppy, and I think that it's kind of box office returns of like being really big opening weekend because everybody wanted to see Friday the 13th, but having the biggest drop off in history was a big sign of what started for me. And I take it personally because I see it as this sign of they went through 4 iterations after that and they couldn't get a movie made, and it's really like the downfall of Friday the 13th before the legal stuff ever came up. So that's that film kind of has like a, I don't know, I see it as like the beginning of the end. So that's what I always associate it, and that's why I consider it the worst one.
I think you're right. They definitely they go deep in the pain of tropes. There's a lot of titties, there's a lot of blood, and there's a lot of characters with no backstory or meaning, which that, not to say that those things aren't found in the the other parts of the franchise, but that's not what defines Friday.
Yeah, I know. I think that like after you have 30 years to analyze a franchise and figure out what works and what doesn't, and also bring something new to the thing, because I think that like their attempt to even bring more story to the Jason backstory was clunky and confusing, because he's a little boy when he comes out and gets his mother's head, but when did he drown? Because he was supposed to drown in 1957. And so like I get nerdy with it. So like when I got nerdy with it and I really broke the film down and started to be like, okay, if you had all this time to really figure it out and like kind of fill in all the plot holes of Friday the 13th, like what are all your solutions? And the solutions were mining tunnels and this story about how a guy just wants to be left alone, but yet does everything within his power to go outside the bounds of Camp Crystal Lake and mess with people. So it like really confused me. I'm like, wait, is he trying to hide? Why is he going in like you say he's smart and he does all these things, but he literally just leaves a trail of dead bodies and the cops literally look the other way. I feel like you've stepped one step beyond what I'm willing to understand of like a functioning town. This just feels like a trope. Everything just feels so tropey and so false that you haven't built a like world building. Like if this is going to go forward and you're bringing back these cops and you're bringing back these characters, or if you're continuing a storyline about this town, I don't see how this town goes to continue on, because this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and then they also had they had tried to cram the first 3 movies into one without making it.
Yeah,
it's really much longer than any of the other. The Friday movies are 90 minutes. That's about it, and you're cramming 3 movies worth of. I guess part 3 doesn't have a whole lot in it besides getting the hockey mask, but all this origin story into one movie.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. It's just I don't know. It feels like it's a mishmash of the first 3 movies. It's like a best of, but I don't know. I don't want to see the greatest hits. I want to see something new. And I think that that's where kind of Never Hike Alone came from. It was the idea of, obviously I had limited resources, but within those limited resources, finding an interesting tale to show Jason in a way you've never done it before, show the camp the way you've never done it before, and tell story like you've never done it before in a Friday the 13th, and set things up. So it was a challenge, to kind of do that, because you would think on paper, I'm not doing any of the tropes. But we found a way to make it interesting and make it, suspenseful. And I think that that's, for me, where the heart of Friday the 13th lies, and something that I think that 2009 actually lacks is I don't feel a lot of suspense. I don't feel anything for the characters. I'm just kind of like sitting back. It feels like another Splatterhouse flick.
And, the Friday, you see it in the comments all the time, people debating who's the best Jason, who's the worst Jason. And I think oftentimes certain actors, and I think Kane Hodder is a great example, will get a lot of shit for having been in movies that honestly weren't that great, but that doesn't mean his performance wasn't good. So with that said, who are your favorite and least favorite people to have portrayed Jason?
Oh, wow. I don't, I don't have a. Oh, I think like my favorite is Ted. My favorite's Ted White. I love his work. I would say, him. I love CJ's work. Kane's work is speaks for itself. I think that it comes down for me. It's less about the actors and more about the portrayals. I think in Freddy versus Jason, I think that was not a great portrayal of the character. I didn't like the way that they took Freddy, and I mean the way that they took Jason and the way they designed Jason. I feel like that was one of the worst designs. Even though I did the open jacket for Never Hike Alone, the open jacket style, which they was predominant in 2009 and Freddy vs. Jason, I don't like either of those looks. That's another reason why I don't like those films. But I like the idea of the jacket, so I tried to kind of tailor it back, and that's where that came from. But with Freddy vs. Jason, I don't know. It's that wasn't the Jason we thought was going to fight Freddy, and I didn't really love the overall tone of that film. As a fan, I wanted to do something, but I mean, at the same time, I do enjoy the story of it. I think it's actually a really clever story. I just don't like the way that like Jason is portrayed, the way he looks, the way the mask looks, just very droopy, not very, and I don't know, it's a little silly. Let me think. Is there anything else? The only other thing that I would say that I don't like from Jason is in the Killer Cut of 2009 when they make Jason have a temper tantrum in his like little den. Like that scene, that was one of the ones that lost me completely. Like that's like a Jason moment that like completely lost me. I'm not a big fan of. I love Adam Marcus, and I've never been a huge fan of Jason Goes to Hell, but it's grown on me over the years. But I still like that design has always been a little like the tucked in shirt and the bubbly head. I don't know. I always kind of liked. The part 6, like that type of style, and I like the colors of that. Like he was in a blue jumpsuit for that one, and I really like the darker greens and browns. Obviously, by the way, like I designed mine. So I think if you wanted to know my preference for Jason, if you look at the Ghost Jason design, it really is kind of my culmination of all the things I love about Jason, with just something unique with the mask.
How do you feel about part 5?
I love part 5. I love Roy Burns. I think that movie is hilarious. I probably would have hated it when it came out back in 1985, 85. I think it was 85. I probably would have hated it because it didn't have Jason in it. I remember the first time I watched it, it didn't have Jason in it. I was so confused. I didn't know who the hell the dude in the mask was. I couldn't tell. And I was like, well, who was I didn't really understand it. And I didn't understand it for many years later, but I've come to appreciate it. And some of my favorite Jason scenes are in that film, and not so much the Roy Burns stuff, but all the Jason Nightmare stuff, and that was a big influence on Never Hike Alone. That's Tom Morga in that costume playing, the Jason that pops up behind Tommy in a few scenes. That one always scared the shit out of me, especially when he was at the end of the bed in the hospital. That freaked me out. So I really enjoy kind of that side of it. It's not the best Friday the 13th film, but it is the last true blue Friday the 13th film.
I would agree because at once part 6 comes, and Tom McLaughlin said this on a number of occasions that he made it funny and he tried to. So 5 was definitely the last serious one, and I had the great pleasure last week of getting to interview Deborah Voorhees.
Oh yeah,
and she had brought a perspective to my attention that I think a lot of Friday fans don't really think about. Is they took the same style from part 1. You had a parent who tragically lost a child, and on a rampage out of revenge. It just happened to be executed not quite as well.
Well, it was very campy. They wanted the body count up. And you can tell the production value had dropped for that film compared to the previous films. But at the same time, it still did pretty. It still had some pretty cool stuff in it. But yeah, that's why I was saying it's the last true blue Friday the 13th, because Tom McLaughlin really changed. He was the first one to change the formula. He changed sort of he brought it back to what people wanted to do. He brought kids back to the camp. He stopped going off to the other locations where Jason or the Jason-like character would eventually go. And if you watch like the production value and the way the film is you can kind of tell that there's a big jump from 5 to 6. But if you watch 1 through 5, they all have aesthetically the same feel, look, structure, kind of story structure and all that stuff. And 6 was the one that kind of brought it up into like the bigger, more blockbustery type Friday the 13th. And I think that's where, even though I love the first 5 films and they're great, I think that I don't know. I think that blockbustery style Friday the 13th is where I think I fell in love with the 6, the 7s, and the 8s. And even though 8 is probably low on everyone's list, there's something about that film, about the grandiose of it, and the fact that Jason is so larger than life, and the fact that he was treated so larger in life, that I think that that's something that I'd like to see come back for the series again, is this larger than life character that really rallies fans to go to the theater and watch it. We just need to put him in a good story. And I think that that's why I'm pushing the Never Hike Alone web series, is because we're going to take Jason, we want to make him larger than life again, and then we want to put him through a story that by the time you get to the end of it, you feel like you've been told the story you've always wanted to hear about Friday the 13th.
Without getting, too analytical, what did you think of Vengeance?
I worked with those guys for a little while, and then we parted ways. Jeremy and I have talked about it. We both see the Friday the 13th franchise very differently. He's very much, an old school guy. He loves, the high body counts. And he, I remember when we were first talking about it, he was really talking about the kills that he wanted to do. And I think that, like, as far as like the goals that he pitched to me when he was first doing it, I think that he did what he wanted to do. My warning to him, I think, was, knowing the subject matter that he was tackling, the Elias, storyline, some of the things that he wanted to do with it, that it's a highly polarizing subject. That's not always a bad thing. I think that when you have something that has, both positive and negative, views on it, it creates a lot of debate, and it creates a lot of communication within the franchise. And I think that franchise fans is what I mean by that. And you see a lot of people debating it. And I think sometimes it goes overboard. And I think that that's the unfortunate side effect of the internet. I remember when I was on, message boards 10, 15 years ago on Bloody Disgusting, where we would like roast each other while talking about the films. It's just kind of part of the culture. And sometimes it goes too far. But, as far as, I think that can work in their favor, just from the fact that, look at Jason Goes to Hell. Jason Goes to Hell is not usually considered high on most people's lists, but it's the most divisive film within the franchise. And it's one of the most talked about. So why would one of the ones that is not considered, you won't see it usually in the top 5, be the one that's talked about a lot? I think that's one of the reasons why you're going to see the In the Heart of Darkness, or The Dark Heart of Jason Voorhees, In the Heart of Darkness, yes, Joseph Campbell. The Dark Heart of Jason Voorhees in that documentary about like how this crazy film got made. And I think that, anytime a fan jumps into the ring to make a fan film, the most important thing that anyone can do is finish a film. And, that's the task that a lot of people are up to. And so, we were fortunate to get through our film and release it and have our reception. Vengeance just had their moment. You have stuff like Voorhees, Jason Rising, The Fall of Camp Blood, and, Here Comes the Night just came out. And you had the Jason versus Michael thing that came out not too long ago. I think what's important is that people are, especially when you're crowdfunding and you're working with other people's money, that if you say you're going to do something, you follow through and you complete it. And I think that that's the ultimate, I think that that's the ultimate lesson here with any fan film.
And I think no matter what people think of Vengeance overall, I think everyone has to say unanimously it was great to see, C.J. Graham back on screen, Steve Dash, all these guys. It's just great to have them part of it. Like when Never Hike Alone, having Tom Matthews back on screen, no matter what you think of the film, those moments are just, something that you can't explain. The nostalgia, and again, taking a chance, and the execution of it may vary, like with Jason Goes to Hell, but they tried something different. They didn't just try to copy and paste what had come before them. And you got to give them a little credit for that, I think. No,
yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. You get credit for doing it. And that's why when I talked to Jeremy about it, when I said, listen, you've picked a divisive thing, so you can't expect it to be all sunshine and rainbows out on the other side, because you're doing some things that are going to upend the series. You're making drastic changes. You're making, you're following characters that weren't established before. So it's gonna one of the things that I've always learned about Friday the 13th is that all the fans are different, and that we all love a different film. A lot of us enjoy the same films, but when you start to get into our 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s, we start to vastly different as things, and those kind of tailor our taste about what we will put up with, so to speak, with like the things that we will forgive. Like I will forgive part 5 4, I will forgive part 8 4, and I will justify why it's higher on my list than something like Freddy versus Jason, which is a way better movie, when it comes to being production value and all that stuff. So I think that that's kind of the fun part of Friday the 13th. And I think that what happens is that, say, like in Vengeance's case, they've done something that is polarizing. Well, the polarizing community that goes for it is going to be just as strong as the polarizing community that's against it. And that in its own form creates its own controversy and subject matter. It becomes something you can talk about. It's a theory that, a lot of these fan film kind of projects that are coming out, you usually won't see them being pitched at a major studio. You wouldn't see these things coming to life. So fans are bringing to life stories that the studios would never make. And if they did make it, who knows what they would do, because they don't really seem to pay attention to what the fans want, or like take any credence to what has been established before for us to kind of create some kind of continuity. They dismiss it. And I think that this is kind of like one of those experiments. Vengeance is an experiment just as much as Never Hike Alone was an experiment, taking Jason out of his formula and putting him in a survivalist movie. And that was a risk. And I think, we and our team worked really hard, and we came up with something that was unique, and we brought our own style to it. And that's, and it the work kind of speaks for itself. And, same with Jeremy and his team. I mean, they brought their style to it, and they shot it their way. And, that's all they can do. They can only go out with what they aimed for. And so they're gonna pick up fans as they go.
And I would say to people, don't compare the two. And that's the big thing that's going on. People are comparing Vengeance to Never Hike Alone, and they're not the same. They're not meant to be the same. They're meant to be, it's apples and oranges. Never Hike Alone's meant to continue after so and so and tell a different story. Vengeance is meant to take place after 6 and tell a vastly different story. So people should quit comparing the two, because they're not something to be compared to one another.
Well, I don't think that. I think that the comparison is inevitable. And that was one thing I talked to Jeremy about too. It's like comparison just comes because people pick their favorites. And then when they start to list them out, they start to see like, oh, wait, why do you like that? You're going to see people listing all the things of why they like a film. And I think that within those like defense of films where we take with the ones that we love, it's within those defenses that one day a fan is going to read it, because they've either made an assumption about it, or maybe they didn't make it all the way through the film. I know a lot of people with Never Hike Alone, I met a lot of people who watched it. They didn't really know what was going on, and they turned it off. And then when they went back and they watched it again, and they went all the way through, they realized, oh, okay, if I give it the time and I let it do its slow burn, that it will pay off. And I think just like that, when fans go out and defend a film and they give people reasons to watch it, then people go in with a certain kind of ready to accept it if they're looking for specific things. And I think that that's kind of part of how we discover the other films, or end up warming up to the other films, is because we understand why people love them. And I know that's what turned me on to Jason Goes to Hell. Is for years I just dismissed it. I remember the way it made me feel as a kid, because I watched Jason blow up, and it fucking broke my heart. I was like, no. And like literally I was in shock for like a half hour. I don't even know if I watched the movie after that. I was just like, no, I don't care if it's like Jason in the mirror. I'm like, where's Jason? And so I never got over that. And so like years later when I got over it, and I was kind of like, whatever, the movie is what it is. I talked to my buddy Brandon, and he was just going on and on about why he loved the film and all the different things. And so when I went back and tried to view the film through his eyes, I enjoyed it much more. And then shortly after that, I ended up meeting Adam Marcus, and he told me things about the film and aspects about the film. And so when I watch the film now, it reminds me of like the conversations we had. And so like now I've attached good memories to it. I've replaced that memory of being so shell-shocked that Jason blew up in my face when I was just like, because you got to imagine, like, I was a new fan. I had just like maybe like chain smoked the entire franchise, trying to go into Jason Goes to Hell, thinking I'm like, yes, here it is. Finally, all the answers I need to, like, what is going on in this series? And then they blew him up. Like, what the fuck? Like, it just, yeah. So like so those, I think that's how it is. I think like whatever it is, whether you like a movie when you first see it or you don't, I think eventually if you Learn to look at it through the fans' eyes and see why they enjoy it and not try to ruin it for anybody else. I think that's the important thing. You can have your opinion, but don't try to ruin someone else's opinion. And then it's all fair game.
And I think I've told this story before about, I have a knack throughout history of starting a franchise with not always the best ones. My first Star Wars movie was Phantom Menace, and I loved it. I was 8 years old, which only made the better films that much better. My first Jurassic Park film was Jurassic Park 3. Not everyone's favorite. Makes the other one seem better. My first Friday was Part 3. Iconic, yes. The best Friday, probably not. But it makes the other ones better by comparison. So I think it depends on your perspective. If Jason Goes to Hell is your first entrance into the series, I think that's just going to make you love it a whole lot more. Or it's going to confuse the hell out of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would confuse the hell out of people if they watched that one first. I mean, it would be a weird introduction because the rest of the films would be like completely different. Same thing. I mean, Jason X too. I mean, Jason X was the first one I got to see in the theater, so that was, even though it is a subpar film, I enjoy it to the aspect that I have good memories associated with it. You know, I remember when I saw it with my friends. I remember how much anticipation there was. I remember expecting it to be stupid as hell. And I went in with those low expectations. And I think that that's why 2009 doesn't sit high on my list, because I went in with high expectations. I went in, they're going to finally, like, again, I went in with that, they're finally going to figure this out and they're going to make a good one. And I walked out of that movie just like, yeah, I want to like it. I really want to like it. But a lot of these things, like, there's a lot of like things I got to try to answer to for like why I should like it. And I lost that battle with my brain.
I mean, I think a lot of it is you have a filmmaker's brain when it comes to analyzing things. Was it horror and Friday the 13th what got you into filmmaking, or was that kind of a passion you always had?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was a boost because I started to really fall in love with practical effects. So watching and stunts and things like that, just like anytime a film did something where you go like, wait, how do they do that? You know, I wanted to know how that was made, and thinking that, like, I remember there's a scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure where he's riding around the Warner Brothers backlot and he goes through like Godzilla's set and like all these other things. And I remember seeing like Godzilla's set and all the people working there and thinking, oh man, I would love to work there. That looks like a fun office. Like, if I want to do anything, like, because at the time I also wanted to play baseball, but like that was the only other thing that I ever saw, and I was like, that looks like a fun job. And I always thought about that, and that's, I think, what kind of brought my interest into it. And then I was just an avid movie watcher and consumer, and I was constantly, you know, no matter where I went, no matter what I thought I was going to do in life, film always had some type of influence on me. And so when I eventually found my way into filmmaking, it kind of like clicked. Like, as soon as I made the decision where I was going full boat into filmmaking, things started to make sense, and my life started to progress in a way that I think that, like, because I was so passionate about it, I went after the things I wanted to get, and just made stuff happen.
I credit Deadbeat James for getting me into Never Hike Alone, because it was his episode of The Kill Count that exposed me to it. And I watched a short interview he had done with you, where you talked about, you know, the catalyst behind you making Never Hike Alone, saying some of the later films kind of got a little silly and you were trying to make a back to basics style film. What was your ultimate goal when you sat down to start making Never Hike Alone?
My ultimate goal was to just tell a complete story and have it be interesting. And you know, my goal with it was an exercise to really show off that I could direct something, that I could see something in my head, and then I could materialize it with a team on set and with all the tools that you utilize to make film with. And I think at that time I had been frustrated as a filmmaker, because I had felt there's certain limitations as you're moving up and you're trying to get better and better, where you feel like you can do better, or you're looking for a cinematic look, or you're kind of doing that. When my goal with Never Hike Alone was to shoot something that when people watched it, they went, wow, this is really cinematic. This feels like a real movie. I wouldn't know that this was shot by 3 dudes hanging out the back of a Jeep. You know what I mean? Like, and going into the woods and just shooting stuff, that we were going to piece it together and build stuff and use, what I had learned in like the 7-8 years that I've been working in the industry at the time, that like watching directors and watching storyboard artists and editors and people work and production designers, and seeing that, the answers aren't very hard. To do this, like when you get good at something and you watch people are really good at it, it's still challenging, but there are so many basic things for you to like kind of start your palette with, that once you start building your palette and you just make a few choices, everything else kind of falls into place because it starts to materialize for you. And I think that like I was having trouble making those things materialize on set, and I wanted to make Never Hike Alone the thing that like always, was like, no, this is like actually how I see it. And so when we found that camp, it was our biggest opportunity because that became our ability to create scope and scale. And so we're able to open up and have, locations and something that wasn't going to cost us any money because we had to go to it. There was nothing we could do to like, it wasn't like we were renting it out from people. It's just abandoned and it's sitting there. So that became like our canvas. And so we just wanted to paint the best story with that canvas. As far as like on the back end about, I just wanted people to like it. I wanted to, my goal with it was to release it and hopefully people watch it and people talk about it for a little bit, but ultimately that it would be good enough that someone would want to play it on the big screen somewhere in front of another Friday the 13th. And we were lucky enough to get into the Telluride Horror Show with it and do an opening night selection screening on Friday the 13th in October 2 years ago. And, that was like a dream come true. And that was it. I mean, I was just happy that we got to go there and show it to people and that it was a special surprise on Friday the 13th. And everything that kind of happened after it was, kind of just a blessing in disguise. I didn't realize that people were going to take to it so much.
That camp you talked about, and I think this kind of played to your advantage because when you watch the movies, it's not like they take you on a tour through the entire camp. You see very limited visibility of the buildings that are there, hence why they're able to shoot at so many different places. Like I live in Georgia where they shot part 6, and they shot part 1 in New Jersey, so on and so forth. Your camp was in California. I want to know, one, how did you find that camp? And what all did you guys do to it to set dress? Because, you called back so much from part 1 with the kill locations in the shower and the archery range and things like that. And for what Andrew had told me, y'all didn't have to beat it up too much because it had just kind of been there for 30 some odd years.
Well, we were shooting the teaser, the one that were released in May of 2016, down the street. And the people who we were filming around their cabins basically said, "Why are you guys filming here? You should film at the camp." We told them that we didn't have money for a camp, and then they told us that there's an abandoned camp a mile up the road, and that if we looked on this map, we would find it. And so they showed us a map. I took a picture of it, and I did my research, and eventually we found the access road, which was blocked off. And then we found out that it was actually open, so we opened up the gate, and we drove up, and we found this camp that was just left there. And so, like, we discovered, as time went on, that mostly it had just been sitting there. It had been abandoned back in the 80s for over like a dispute over water source. And so since the camp didn't want to deal with it or even deal with that location anymore, they just moved to another camp and they shut that one down and locked the gates, and that was it. And it's just been there ever since. And the only people who ever find it now are just people who take these very specific hike trails from a campground, but you have to follow a specific thing, and it's a pretty tough hike. And then, of course, there are locals that go there. So we got to meet most of those people, and we told them what we were doing. And, part of the deal was we were set dressing the camp, so we built tables, and we put up the curtains, and we reboarded the windows so we could let some light in. And we cleaned up a lot. We took a lot of trash out. We took a lot of glass out. When we were done shooting, we completely renovated the main cabin. So we redid the windows again, took out all the glass, took out all the trash, and really tried to clean it up. So when people go to visit there, that if they want to stop and take a break in the shade, that they can go there and not worry about stepping on a nail or glass or like cutting their arm on something, that they could actually, take a breather and actually hang out in a really cool place to really check out.
Speaking of injuries, from what I understand, you sustained a pretty serious injury during the filming of the movie, and you stayed on set the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
We were set dressing for a shot and the shot didn't even get used in the movie, where Andrew walks by like these broken windows, and I was putting a door frame up in the window to kind of, just create some shapes in the frame and stuff like that. And as I was reaching through the window, there was a piece of glass I didn't see sticking out, and it cut my arm. And it literally felt like something bit me. It felt like a bite. And then like I flipped my arm over, and I just saw like cut down to the fatty tissue, like deep in. And I was like, oh shit. And I just remember being so pissed because we had just done all this work to get up there. We were just about to get ready to do some work and get some stuff done. And shit, now I'm cut. And what am I supposed to do? And so we ended up just, I ran over to the U-Haul truck, and I wrapped it up best I could just to keep it from anything getting into it. Talked to the guys and said, all right, just wrap my arm up. So we wrapped it in a bandage. We wrapped it in a towel, like duct taped it. And for the next 6-7 hours, we just worked. We finished our shots. We got through the day, went back to our Airbnb, and then Kyle, the producer, took me to the emergency room where I got stitched up and, actually interviewed the nurses about cuts and what happens when you get cut out in nature, because they were lecturing me about like, well, when did you cut this? I said, oh, about 7 hours ago. And they were like, 7 hours ago? Jesus. I was like, well, I wrapped it up. And they were like, still, like, if you were out in the forest and you were around stuff, this could have got infected. Like, we really got to clean this thing out. And I was like, do what you got to do. And so, I mean, they spent, I want to say 20, 25 minutes just spraying this wound with saline. And it did not feel comfortable. It did not feel good. And it was part of the inspiration for what we did with Kyle's leg in Never Hike Alone. It like, as I was, that scene was always in Never Hike Alone, but me experiencing that firsthand helped me kind of bring an extra level to both Andrew's performance and both the kind of the logic behind what he was trying to do and why he had to do what he had to do, and make people understand that if he didn't clean out that leg, if he would have gone out the other way and never came back to get his supplies, he eventually would have succumbed to some type of infection, would have gotten lost because he was on an unknown trail and didn't have his maps. And then, if the coyotes didn't get him, that this infection would eventually overtake him and he would get lost and he would die. So if he get back and heal it and go home and get out the other side, it would have made more sense.
Now, of course, Never Hike Alone is pretty much a two-character movie. It's Kyle and Jason. So you have to be very selective when picking the lead for this, because he's pretty much all you see on screen for 45 minutes. Was Andrew always the choice, or did you just do some auditions?
No, I mean, I've known Andrew for a long time. We worked together. And when I first came up with this project, I asked him if he wanted to do it. He said yes, and he's been the guy ever since. And I think that, for a ride. And I think that, that friendship helped us really put trust in one another. And we grew as friends as we made it. And we got really close just from, working on set. And I know he was really, the only thing that I needed out of him was the dedication, and he brought it. I mean, he didn't cut his hair. He didn't shave his beard, except for the one time that he delayed production for 6 weeks because he had to shave his beard for a commercial. That I'll never let him forget about, but I still love him anyway. But that was like kind of like one of the things we had to do. It's like we were working within everyone's schedules, so that was one of the things that we're like, shit, Andrew's got to shave. We got to wait. We got to delay everything. So, but anyway, he was just, he had the personality for it. And as we started to craft Kyle and who he was, we had done the trailer, the first one, and it was a good experimentation about like what he could bring to the character. And then as we were writing and I got to know him better, I kind of tailored Kyle to match Andrew. There's a lot of Andrew in Kyle. It reflects his personality. And I thought that would be a good, start, I think for us as far as like building a character. And there were things that Andrew brought to Kyle that I think were he became a hero. And I think that's the qualities that he did. He was, he was likable. He was strong. He faced things head on, and he never gave up. And I think that's what made him such a heroic character, and what made fans want to root for him. He wasn't whiny. He wasn't snivelly. He wasn't like, he wasn't whiny. He just took what Jason gave him and did his best to stay on his feet and keep going. And he didn't stop until, he couldn't walk anymore.
Am I correct in my understanding that Kyle actually died in the original script?
He did. He died 2 different ways. And the producers begged me not to kill him. And then Tom got involved, and that basically sealed the deal on his surviving. The original ending was his head crush. He dies at the side of the lake, and that was the end of the film. And then everyone was like, "Oh, what an awful way to end a movie." And I was like, "It's actually the best way to end the movie, but I am open to making this thing longer and figuring something out." And so that's when I started coming up with the ambulance scene, and I had a version of the ambulance. I was like, well, I want to do more than one death. Like, I want to surprise people and do multiple deaths at the end of the film. So there was a version of the ambulance scene where Jason does the exact same stuff, but Tom wasn't involved. And the driver gets killed. And we do the same thing. We stayed inside the van. Everybody's killed off screen. And then Jason climbs inside the van at the end. And we do the same drone shot where it's droning up. And instead of the ambulance driving away, Jason steps in and blood just starts flying out the back of the ambulance. and then it tilts up to the horizon and says "Never Hike Alone," and that was the way it was supposed to end. And then when Tom came on, I told him about the ending, and so there were two endings. There was one where nobody died, and they drove off into the sunset, and you didn't know whether Jason was real or not. And Kyle had survived, and he just said he's still out there, and he drove off. It was very much like a match to Friday the 13th Part 1. And then obviously it was the ending I just pitched you, where everybody died. But when Tom came involved, we were like, ugh, I cannot kill Tom Matthews. What are we going to do? And so that's when we came up with the idea that since everything happened off screen, you don't necessarily see what happens to Tom. And even though Axel died, he did get there just in time to save Tom's life. I mean, Tom's injured, and we'll see that in future installments. But he's able to get in and save the day and drive off and kind of say, and that's what opened up the door for us to want to do a web series, was that was the kickoff to, okay, what's this story? And that's what, prompted me to start writing the Never Hike Alone 2 film as a featured sequel, and then eventually coming up with a web series.
Well, Tom Matthews has not done a vast number of fan films, and in fact, I believe he turned down the Vengeance for having been in Never Hike Alone. What was your pitch to him that got him to say, yes, I've got to be a part of this?
We sat down and he watched half the film. Fully, we had sequences. I showed him, I shot half the film, and I showed him the second trailer. And, the second trailer really brought to life everything that we were talking about. It had some of our stunt sequences in it. It had some of our effect sequences in it. I showed him stuff that, people didn't see until the movie. I showed him behind the scenes stuff. And it was really just this sit down of a guarantee that, listen, I'm not going to take up much of your time. I'm going to need you out there for 1, maybe 2 days if you take this role. I can't rewrite the film for you because I'm already halfway in and I don't have enough money to go back and reshoot it, with a Tommy storyline. And that what I pitched him on was, you're going to be the guy jumping out of the birthday cake at the end and just surprising everybody. Like, you are what I wanted to do. It was really a big mission of mine that Never Hike Alone stood on its own 2 feet as a movie made by fans, procured by fans, fundraised by fans, made by fans, like the whole 9 yards, just like, this is a fan film. And then once you got through everything that we did that we thought was like kind of raising the bar of a fan film, like the stunts, like some of the effects work that we did, the storytelling, the camera work, the drone work, a lot of the stuff that we put into it to make it feel like a bigger than life kind of fan film. Then at the end, we surprise you with Tommy Jarvis, and he just shows up out of nowhere. The best part of us not announcing it at the time, like nobody knew Tom was in it, which was really great. So it was a big surprise for fans. So that was, when I pitched him in that, I said, this is the trajectory of it. And I think that like, that's going to be a big moment. Like, think about how the people we can surprise. And I think that that's when he was like, all right, this will be special. This isn't like trying to come up, at the time, like when he didn't really know me, he was like, you know what, I can at least trust him enough for this. And this seems worthy to get into. He really loved the footage, and we started working together, and it really worked out. And, it was his ideas that actually led to Never Hike Alone 2. He pitched me a couple of scenes, and I went, oh my God, I love that scene. I just don't know where it fits in this movie, but I know it fits in this story somewhere. And that's some of the scenes that he pitched me are what we are going to make for Never Hike Alone 2.
The practical effects in the movie are really good, from Kyle's wounds to Jason getting hit with the axe to Andrew's head being crushed by the lake. Who designed Ghost Jason?
That was designed by an artist by the name of Kelsey Burke. Her and I, it was funny. Her and I got together at a Starbucks one day, and we talked about all the kills in the movie, and then we talked about the face, and we talked about how we were going to make the face work. So the cowl itself is actually an off-the-shelf hood that anyone can buy from CFX in Louisiana. Same with the gloves. You just look their silicone lineup; they have it. It's the face has the cutout cowl. And our idea was that since we didn't have the money to build a brand new head, we would lay the face into the existing cowl and blend it in. And so Kelsey and I talked about some tech, just some reference. We sent stuff back and forth. It was very funny because we sent each other the same reference a lot of the time. Like, we'd send something and like she'd send something back like at the same time, and it'd be like, oh yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, that's the thing I'm talking about. And so I originally did a Photoshop cluster of all the reference that we did, and then I passed that off to her. She sculpted it, she molded it, she did the silicone work, she painted it, she did the dental work on me to get it in. She casted my face, she did all the work. She applied it, and it looked really cool. And so we designed it around us not having the budget to do what you would typically see in a film, or the type of level, but we did what we could to show off the damage that Jason had received in previous films. Also, this like kind of like eyeless, ghoulish Jason, this ghost Jason style, and then used lighting to our advantage, to where like part of the design of his face was actually a part of the lighting of the cinematography, or that we would black out some of his face, knowing that we wouldn't have to pay attention to the detail as much there because we were focusing on the eyes and the mouth mostly.
Generally speaking, what of the original franchise is canon in the Never Hike Alone universe?
I consider 1 through 8 canon. I consider this when Jason washed out to sea at the end of 8, that he wasn't necessarily defeated. This is the first time he wasn't chained down or anything. And eventually he found his way back to Crystal Lake and went into hiding. And this is that Jason 30 years later. So I can't tell you 100% for sure how the continuity between 1 and 8 actually work, because no one can. And those are directors' films that I can't do. But what I can say is that in the Never Hike Alone universe, in some way, shape, or form, those events happened. And they're memories, and they're long lost. And they were in the 80s or in the early 90s. And, they're basically treated like Jonestown now, or anything of that ilk, where it's there, but even more secretive because this town has gone reclusive. Even the town has like receded itself. And even though it's still called Crystal Lake, they kind of hide in plain sight. They're like, is it the same Crystal Lake? And they're like, no, it's not the same. There's, how many Crystal Lakes there are in America? Like, trust me, it's not this one. And that's the way that they portray themselves now, and at least in our universe. And when Kyle stumbles across the camp in our world, it has been taken off the map. I mean, when he looks in his book, he's like, the trails aren't here. This camp's not here. This is much more than a nature preserve. And you realize that Camp Crystal Lake in this world has been hidden within the bounds of a nature preserve that's just really the local police and townships not being able to do anything about this place. Like, they don't want to go up there. They don't want to deal with it. They just want to forget about it and move on. And, and eventually somebody's going to find it. And that's our character, Kyle MacLeod.
Now, when you said when Tom came on board, he was not originally in the script. What was it, as a sense of legitimacy for a filmmaker to have had him come on board? Someone who was such a fan favorite and, such a character that was, as far as, the top fan films like 4 and 6, as far as having him come on the project, what did that mean to you as both a filmmaker and a fan?
I mean, I was floored. You should have seen me. I was like, came home and I was just like, I couldn't believe it. And I felt an intense amount of pressure to, make sure that like because I mean, like when you're on a set with your friends and you're getting stuff done, there's allowances. You're all like, whatever, we're just roughing it and all that stuff. But like when you want to bring someone on who's been in amazing films and has had an amazing career, you want them to feel like they're on a set like they'd be anywhere else. And so we took a lot of great care into making sure that, when he came on set, that we had a place for him to be, and that he was well taken care of and everything was run professionally. And I was very proud of the growth of our team, of being this guerrilla unit that goes out and shoots in small packs, and then also was able to expand to a team of about 25 people and run a functional set. So, I mean, that was a big thing for me, of being able to like not only work with Tom, but also make Tom feel comfortable, like he was in something that meant something and that was being well run. And that was really important to me. Just being able to work with him and directing him, it was very surreal. But it's something I will never forget. And I can't thank him enough for giving me that opportunity, and also, giving us the opportunity to continue working forward and tell his story.
Now, Never Hike Alone has just about 1 million hits on YouTube, and I've yet to see a fan have a negative perspective on it. Did you?
There's a few.
Well, I'm sure, because you're probably out there beating yourself up looking through the comments. But did you expect the fan reaction to be so positive?
No, I expected it to polarize them and say, oh, well, there's no kills and what's the point? And I'm glad that so many fans get it. They get that I get it. Yeah, kills, all those things. Yeah, lovely. But like, how about for once, can we just stop and take a look around Crystal Lake for a little while? Like, how fun would that be? That's always been a wish fulfillment thing for me. I've always wanted to see in a film, is actually walk around and tour the camp. And if you're going to do the found footage aspect, that's the way to do it. I mean, this is, the best found footage films are usually some type of archaeological I can't say it, archaeological like search. That's what I wanted to say. There we go. And or some fact-finding mission. And I think that by turning Friday the 13th into a fact-finding mission, there are things that fans know that the character doesn't. And there are moments that, like, when the character gets to a place that the fans recognize it, and it's like going home again. And I think that that was kind of the point of the middle of the movie until we come to Jason. And prior to that, it was the opening to like any other standard adventure movie you've ever seen. We wanted to establish that type of tone. And so like I expected, a lot of people to kind of dismiss it, but the fact that so many people have welcomed it and so many, festivals reached out to us and said, hey, we'll welcome this amongst the original bunch, even though it's a fan film. And, we got disqualified from awards and things like that, and a lot of them, but it wasn't really about that. It was more about getting the opportunity to sit in a room with Friday the 13th fans and show it to them and then turn around and go, wow, I would have never expected that out of a fan film. That was really good, good job. And so that's like the reward of it.
And you said when Tom came on board and he pitched some scenes to you that were like, I can't fit it in this movie, but we'll fit it in future movies. What was the point where you decided, all right, we're making more of these and we're making a prequel?
I knew I wanted to make more. I mean, I've always wanted to make more. I think the question of making more was never really a question. I just want to keep making Friday the 13th films as much as I can. And I think it was right around when the end of Never Hike Alone, I really believed in the film, and I thought that if I could get it in front of some people who actually make decisions in the Friday the 13th world, that I could actually start pitching Never Hike Alone 2 as a feature film. Because it really is its own movie. It's its own, the way Never Hike Alone 2 was written originally, it really was its own story about Tom that Never Hike Alone would have been a good compendium for. So you eventually, yes, you would have met the Kyle MacLeod character. You would have seen brief snippets of him, but you wouldn't have seen him as in depth from his perspective. It would have all been from Tom's perspective. And we would have jumped to Kyle every now and then. And when I started to like look at it and, with everything going on with the franchise things, and I pitched it to a few people, I started to realize that like I can either sit around and wait for the franchise to give me permission again, or I can just figure it out myself. So that's when I started thinking about the web series aspect and breaking up the film into 3 parts. So an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3, each with their own budget, each with their own shooting schedule. And while I was doing that, I got the idea, because I had been pitching around to other fan films who were looking for ideas. I was like, you should do something in the snow. You should do something in the snow. You should do something in the snow. That's the one nobody's touching. You should totally do that. And everybody passed on the idea. They're like, no, we don't feel like shooting in the snow. And I went, I don't blame you. And then as I was writing the story for Never Hike Alone, I started to think, Never Hike Alone 2, I started to think of this story about Never Hike in the Snow. And so I thought, it would be really nice, since we're not going to be doing anything for a while, it'd be cool to just go out and make a snow short. Like really stick to my guns on this one, keep it under 20 minutes, spend only so much money, and, just knock something out and drive fans wild. It was the same thing, I think, the same inspiration for what like Disappear was, the music video that we just released. It was something to like go out and wow fans with like a small amount of money, but do something really like high concept. And then that's kind of how I originally thought about Never Hike in the Snow. And then I connected it to the Never Hike Alone kind of series idea and expanded the characters, put Tommy in it, and I put Rick in it, and I put another character in it that you'll meet through the series who's very important. And kind of show what life is like prior to Kyle MacLeod. And then as you start watching the series, you start to see where we meet Kyle MacLeod and then what life is like after Kyle MacLeod.
So after the Never Hike Alone web series wraps up, are there any future plans going beyond that?
Yeah, I have a lot more of what I could do. Whether or not fans will still continue to support it, I don't know. I think by that time the thing's got to be over by then, the lawsuit rights. And so I think that's really good. That's when you're going to probably see fan films start to die down, because then we're going to be anticipating like the real ones. I would love to pitch those films to Warner Brothers and New Line and Spring Hill and whoever else is jumping on this stuff. I've tales about Pamela, sequels to other films, original content, like a complete reboot of Friday the 13th. These are just ideas that I've written down and put in as much thought as I have Never Hike Alone, to thinking like these will all be really interesting things for Friday the 13th fans to enjoy. And if given the opportunity, I think that, I'd like to take this to the next level and make everything legitimate, including Never Hike Alone, taking this, inserting it into the franchise and rallying the fans and, being a Cinderella story for like, out of all of this Like if there's one thing that emerged out of all of this drought was that eventually a fan figured out, made his way into the industry, really answered the call to the fans, and then is now carrying the torch for us in the next generation. And they can trust me with, leading Friday the 13th in the right direction.
Have you had any studio backlash? Because you pitch movies to them, and if anyone's played the games, pretty much since 2016, 2017, we've all just been sitting in limbo waiting for something to happen. Have they given you any pushback? Because I know you haven't, you didn't make $1 million off Never Hike Alone or anything, but have they been knocking at your door saying, "Hey, calm down a little bit"?
No, I mean, they know that there's no money in fan films. I mean, Never Hike Alone and most of these fan films end up putting the filmmakers in debt more than anything. I mean, we raised some money, but we really didn't raise that much crowdfunding money, and everything else that was given to us was a gift. That only paid for so much. A lot of it came out of personal pocket, and I spent a long time after that paying it off, doing, the Blu-ray runs and stuff like that, just to pay off the rest of the budget, because we had to, when people wanted Blu-rays, I had to bring it back into color correction and finish it. And like, there were lots of things that people don't realize how much it costs to make independent films. There's so much cost in each level of production, and a lot of it comes out of your personal time. If you can put in the personal time, that's the cheap way to do it, but it takes a long time because you only got so much time. Or you can go find someone on the internet, with some crowdfunded money or even your own personal money and say, hey, you want to design this for me? And just, you pay freelancers. So it was a complicated, process of getting it made. And I think that, the studios, as long as we're not making hundreds of thousands of dollars, which I don't think, none of us have even really, I mean, we got a toe over the line of 51,000 on our Blu-ray campaign. And no one that I've seen in the Friday the 13th realm has ever crossed that. I've seen some other fan films go into the hundreds, 200,000s and get away with it. I think I saw a Power Rangers film at around $300,000. But then there was the one that went over, 1.2 million or something that for Star Trek. And that was the one that got the lawsuit. So when you start talking about $1 million budgets and seeing that like there's actual like, now that's money that's got to be processed, it's going to go through a lot of things, and people are not getting their cut from the franchise, then I think that's when you see them really worrying about it. But for Victor or Sean or anyone in the franchise to take the time to sue us, that would be a waste of their money. And if they sent us a cease and desist, we would just stop. But I don't think that that's the way they see fan films. I think that they have that same spirit of like, fan films keep the spirit alive. No one's trying to compete. No one's trying to make a buck. No one's trying to, get rich off this stuff. Like, I'm not living in a mansion. I'm in a, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. So like nobody's like running rich over here. And I don't think with any of the fan films. And a lot of us have raised money for charity. I know Vengeance raised a ton of money for, the Shriners. We raised money for Penny Pines Reforestation Project. And we also did our own restoration project, the college camp restoration project, which restored our Camp Crystal Lake so people don't cut themselves on glass and, have a safe place to walk when they go visit, our Camp Crystal Lake. We also donated to the JD Martz Recovery Fund, who JD was one of our directors of photography on Never Hike Alone. He suffered a life-altering neck injury towards the end of production. Not on production, it was actually after we finished filming, but he was at the beach, dove into the water, and he's been paralyzed from the shoulders down ever since. He's been 2 years in recovery now, and we stay in touch and we check in on him. He just did some stuff down in Kentucky to maybe become part of a study that might help him walk again. And he's hearing good news, so we're all just rooting for him. So anytime we can raise some money and we get some extra stuff, we'd like to put it in his JD Martz Recovery Fund, which you can find online at jdmartz.com. So yeah, you should definitely check those out, and both Penny Pines and JD Martz.
Now you've got other Friday alums, more particularly in for Part 6 coming in. How excited were or are you to work with them?
Oh, wow. I mean, with Vinny Guastafaro, I'll start with him. So Tom introduced me to Vinny right after Never Hike Alone. So Vinny and I met, we went for breakfast one day, and I think we sat there for 3 hours just talking about the business and being Vinny's and just, I don't know. And he was just this ball of energy, and I loved it. And he invited me to come audit his acting class. And so I've been auditing his acting class as a director for like 2 years. I come in, I sit in, I watch him work with actors, I watch actors work out scenes on stage, and it helps me as a director understand the mindset of an actor. And Vinny teaches a few techniques, which is pretty cool. So I get to see a variety, and his he very much, we're in the same school of like, go as, break it and then pull it back type deal. I usually encourage my actors to bring something big, not feel afraid to really let go with their characters. And when they go too far, I'll rein them in. If not, you end up playing this game of like, oh, just a little bit further, just a little bit further, and you never get there. So that's something that Vinny and I have the same thing. So when he came on to like bringing back Rick Cologne, that, I mean, for me, that was like the key. I mean, that's one of the key elements of the Never Hike Alone web series, is the fact that we're putting Tommy versus Rick again. Rick's held a grudge all these years for the death of Garrus, blames Tommy for it. Tommy won't leave. He stays in town, and he's a nuisance. He's like Ralph. He finds him in all the places he shouldn't find him, kicking up shit, kicking up controversy and rumors. And, Rick's got to run this town and keep it safe and keep the secret locked up. And, and Tom he's a pain in his ass. And they've just been bickering for 30 years, you know what I mean? And it's just, and you see the tail end of this relationship of and I think what's really cool about it is we actually build it into our storyline about Rick's sneaking suspicion about thinking that Tommy may snap one day again. He thinks Tommy's a ticking time bomb. And so when bodies start turning up in Crystal Lake, I don't know if it's Jason that Rick looks towards first to blame for it. And so I think that that's going to become a cool obstacle for Tommy's character to overcome as he's trying to figure out this mess that he stumbled into when he meets Kyle MacLeod. So Rick's character being in it is not just hey, we're putting an alumni in just for the sake of having an alumni. He plays a key role in the story and really setting the tone of, why Crystal Lake is the way it is now. And in fact, in Never Hike in the Snow, Vin has one of the most important scenes, if not the most important scene, aside from, all the fun stuff. Rick has, he really has this scene of command where you see how he runs his town and you see the circumstances that he's kind of dealing with. And I think that because Vinny's such an amazing actor, you're going to see a level of performance that you would see in Friday the 13th Part 6. You're getting that same actor coming back, but now delivering, that being that character. And he can't wait to get back into the role. I mean, he said time and time again that Rick Cologne is probably, if not the favorite, one of his most favorite characters that he's ever done. He still gets mail about it. He still signs wherever the red dot go, you bang. He understands fans love Rick, and he can't wait to bring them back. And of course, our other big signing was Douglas Tate. So obviously, I played Jason along with Brian Forrest. But, when I decided to step away from playing Jason to focus on acting, I had actually received an email from Douglas Tate early on in the process of Never Hike Alone, right after we had released. And it was very encouraging, and it was just really nice. He was the first alumni who, of course I knew Tom, but at the time I didn't know anybody else, and nobody had reached out to me. And Doug was the first, and Tom McLaughlin was the second. Tom McLaughlin sent me a message on Facebook. But Doug was the first one to write an email, and I remember bumping into him at a convention, and we had a nice long conversation. It was a lot like Vinny. We just started talking about film and short film, and he told me what he wanted to do with his career and what he'd been doing. And I was very appreciative of all the suit work that he's done over the years. He played Jason in Freddy vs. Jason, but he's gone on to play all these different characters. He's working in all the top-notch horror films these days. He was in The Conjuring. He was in Hellboy. He's messing with Sasquatch. He's in Legions on CW. He does work across the board. And he's just very talented at what he does. And when I started thinking about who would be, if I could bring a Jason in, who would I bring in? And because Doug was so nice to me, and I really realized that he's this untapped potential for a Jason. When people talk about, alumni Jasons, they always go to Kane. Bring back Kane, bring back CJ, bring back blah, blah, blah. It was you know what? Doug's primed to come back and really deliver something because he's a character actor, he's a creature actor, and he's an actor. And that's what I need for Ghost Jason. Ghost Jason is not just a dude in a suit hacking and slashing. There's some things ticking in his brain, and I think anyone who watched the Disappear music video understands kind of the nuance of what I try to bring with the character. So Disappear was really my farewell to playing the character full time. And I wanted to kind of set a precedence of what I think Doug is going to bring to the character. Doug is going to bring that nuance and that character to it, but he's also going to bring next level stunt work. So the type of, I can do some pretty decent stunt fighting. I'm not too bad, but I have to say, I have to give a lot of credit for Brian Forrest for carrying the torch on most of those fight scenes for us in Never Hike Alone. That's a lot of that's him. I did a lot of the acting stuff and a lot of the establishing stuff. I wore the face stuff. I jumped out of the water. I did all the stuff on the trail, but a lot of the fighting and a lot of the stuff in the camp is Brian, because we had to move through production and he was doing such a great job. And I still foresee Brian coming in and doubling for Doug on days either when we can't get him or we need to do double work, because Doug's going to be our A actor. But I want Doug to do a lot of stuff because he's just very good at what he does. And I think you'll see Brian Forrest popping up like in around the movie in different places, which will be really, really cool.
About one of the fight scenes in Never Hike Alone. How much fun was it for you when Andrew got hit in the dick?
I was laughing. That was Brian. And I think what happened, it happened twice. I think it happened once when we were rehearsing and I was rehearsing with him and I hit him in the dick. And then when Brian was doing it, one of the first takes, he smashed him and I was behind camera. And we all, it's like, those are the times when everyone laughs on set, everybody has a good time, and then you have to refocus and keep going. But yeah, I mean, anytime something happens to Andrew, like he falls, like he fell on his face so many times during Never Hike Alone, where he'd be running through the forest, he'd have this big backpack on, we'd stuff it full of like jackets and shit, give it a little bit of weight, and he'd be like sprinting through the forest and like trip over a rock, or like trip over a stick, or like step in a hole and just face plant. And it happened so many times, and like it was like every time he'd always fall and he'd fuck up his costume somehow. We'd have some continuity error. I'm like, now you have this big grass stain and I can't get out of your pants for the rest of the day. I'm like, you jerk. And he's just like, you. And so like we always used to pick on him. In fact, if you watch the behind the scenes, one of those classic falls is in the behind the scenes right at the end past the credits.
What other projects outside the Never Hike Alone universe are you working on or planning to work on that aren't, horror related?
Not horror related at all?
Well, let's say
not fan film related?
Yeah.
So we have Pathos, which is actually finishing up post-production right now. That's directed by a good friend of mine, Austin Bonang. We did it through Womp Stomp Films, and we fundraised for that. So that's going to hit the festival circuit very soon. We're very proud of that one. That's a 13-minute short film that we produced and shot in Los Angeles, California. We're really proud of it. It's really cool. I mean, some of the VFX that are coming in now, like we knew we had like something, but like when you see it on camera, you're like, I know this is going to get better. This is just plate. We're going to build some stuff on top of this and really bring it into the next level. And Austin, aside from being a previs genius, he's also a VFX guy. So he knew that he was bringing certain elements to it that we were all like couldn't wait to see as it would kind of blossom, and now it's starting to blossom into that. And it was my goal for our team to come away and walk away with a weekend that was well run, that we hit all our marks. We didn't run behind, which we didn't. We actually got everything we wanted to shoot. And we made it look really good. We shot with an RE Mini, which is, kind of industry standard right now, and some Cook lenses. So we got a really cinematic look. It's shot beautifully by Ben Meredith. And we really crafted this because our goal was to make it feel like something you would watch on Netflix. So a production value of something that's of that ilk. And so I think that's what we're striving for. And hopefully we can get as close to that target as possible with this short, go wow some people and show that Womp Stomp Films is, here to mess with people. And that will also kind of lead into our production value of what we'll be taking into Never Hike Alone as well. Aside from that, I've been attached to direct a film called The Kindness of Strangers for Circle of Confusion. And we've been working on the draft. I was given a draft of the film, I would say earlier this year, and we just finished. We're actually working on our second round of it right now. Hopefully going to start fundraising for it soon. Not crowdfunding, but mostly going out, finding the funding for it and getting it made. And it's really cool. It's about two serial killers that discover each other on the open road and then battle it out till only one's left standing. It's kind of more of a horror action comedy. And it's, it's a 90-minute film. It's filled with a lot of stuff. I can't wait to make it. People said, Vin, go out and create a new slasher. And so in this film, we have two. And so it's going to be really cool for people to see these two characters battle it out and see which one's going to last and make it to the end of the day. And that will be hopefully a new character that people will really rally behind.
I put out the word that you were going to be on the show and asked for fans to submit questions. I only got two, but maggothead_cosplays on Instagram wants to know, will at any point in the future, will we get to see a Never Hike Alone where Ghost Jason's mask is just all kinds of fucked up?
That's kind of the point. So with the web series, my idea is that I want to do something that's never been done before in Friday the 13th, and that's actually carry a consistent continuity as the costume continues to get damaged. So Ghost Jason, through each installment, obviously Never Hike in the Snow, nothing's going to happen to him because we need to see him established as he is in Never Hike Alone. But as Never Hike Alone 2, 3, and 4 happen, the episodes, Ghost Jason will sustain an injury at the end of each one that will change his appearance and then lead into the next one. The mask will go through a change at some point and get damaged because we want to come up with our own version of like the axe mark and stuff like that. So we're going to try to think of ways to develop that as we go. And we have an idea, but obviously ideas change as you move, especially when you hear like what it costs to do certain things and like what we're going to do. So we're exploring a few different ways, but we're going into it with the same attitude we had before. We're going to come up with something that, you know, makes fans sit back in their seat or sit forward and go, how the hell did they do that?
And then we have Kevin McKinnon on Facebook wants to know, as far as Never Hike Alone relates, what was the most difficult scene to shoot?
The most difficult scenes to shoot were the scenes on the no trespassing sign scene. Only because getting to those scenes required, getting to those sets, I mean, required a long hike with a lot of equipment. I would hike in costume. I wouldn't have the jellies on yet. We call them the jellies, the silicone hands and stuff, or the head. I would have it in a backpack. But other than that, we were carrying up like hundreds and thousands of pounds of equipment up this hill that was probably on with nothing is a 15, 20-minute hike straight up. So it's probably like a 45-minute hike straight up with all this equipment. Then you get up there. There is no base camp. There's no place to go to the bathroom. We're literally setting up on the side of the trail where like there's nothing. It's hot. It's in the hills of Malibu. So like it was cool. Like, but what I loved about it was the look. And that's why we made that thing. It was the hardest to shoot up there. And we shot up there, I want to say 7 or 8 times because we either ran out of light a bunch of times or we didn't get something right. So we had to go get a pickup. But I got to say that once we conquered that trail and we got everything that we needed for it and it was done right, those are 2 of my favorite scenes in the film. And I always use those as examples of, my opinion, our team functioning at its highest level on almost every front. The cinematography, the acting, the pacing, the editing, the music, all those things are all firing on all cylinders, I think, for me. That's where I really feel proud about the film. And then also knowing what we overcame to shoot those scenes.
And a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes, but Never Hike Alone gets so much credit because, to the best of your ability, because continuity is kind of scrambly throughout the movies. You know, you have the no trespassing sign from part 2, you have all the death scenes from part 1. You know the brown sign with the Camp Crystal letters in white. I trying to describe. I think you know what I'm talking about. You guys went above and beyond to keep continuity alive and to keep it going further. And just from the hour we've been talking and talking with Andrew about your love for the franchise, it's very apparent that you are a student of the franchise and you have a deep love for it and are doing everything in your power to keep it going and to do fans justice. And as a fan, I just want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. No, I mean, it's a nerddom. I've always, when I talk to my friends from home, it's funny. Every now and then I talk to somebody I haven't talked to in a long time, and they always laugh because they're like, even my brothers were like, this is so perfect for you. Like, you've been jabbering about Friday the 13th for decades. And, you made us watch them 1,000 times and all this stuff. The fact that you've gone out and created something like this just seems to make a lot of sense. And, like I said, like, you never know what you're going to be when you grow up. And you always wonder what people are going to pursue in their careers. And like, people may have, like when I was a kid, thought I was either going to play sports or do something else or get, it was probably going to be sports related. But the fact that Friday the 13th ended up becoming the thing and that kind of, I don't know, became a calling card for me, they're all kind of laugh about it because they're like, of course it is. Of course it is, knowing who you are. So, that means a lot. But I mean, like, I love this franchise and I think that that's where it all comes from. When I see people like say stuff online like, oh, they're doing it for the money or why are they doing this or why are they doing that? It's like, this is all I've ever wanted to do. Like, my one dream in life was to direct a Friday the 13th movie, work on a film, and the more I tried to pursue it and get closer to it, the farther the franchise ran away from me. They wouldn't make films. They wouldn't hire me at the studios. I wasn't, my resume wasn't sharp enough to get in as a production assistant for Friday the 13th, whatever they were going to make. I couldn't get into Bay Films. I couldn't even get my resume through the door. And then, then they canceled them. And I said, screw it. I'm just going to do it myself. Why am I going to keep waiting for somebody to give me what I want out of life when if I follow these simple rules, I might not get $10 million to make it, but hey, at least I get to make it. And I think, again, that's the most important things about these fan films is that, like, as long as you make it and you get something out there for people to talk about, you're adding something to talk about and you're keeping things fresh and you're keeping people interested and you're doing a good job. And you know, and Womp Stomp Films is going to support you. I'm going to support you. Other fan films are going to support you. And I hope that fans do too.
And I've talked to a great number of people who are out there trying to make their own fan films. You've talked to me briefly before about making one. Brandon Zachman, who is my co-host, has talked to you at length about making his, and he's always talked about how gracious you are. And we've talked at length today about how you're willing to help other people. Because again, you're not out to make a monopoly of this. You're not trying to have Never Hike Alone take over the Friday the 13th universe and make it a one-person operation. So what is it that is your inspiration to help these other people to get their vision on screen, although it may not be something that you would make yourself?
I mean, I think it's always comes down to responsibility. This is a lot of fun. I mean, don't get me wrong. Nothing's more fun than strapping on some costumes and going throwing blood against some trees all weekend. But it's a responsibility, you know, on a lot of different levels. And I think that that's my biggest piece of advice is be responsible. If you crowdfund money and people give you money, deliver on your promises. Also, self-correct yourself and self-analyze yourself. Understand, you know, what your limitations are. You're not going to, you know, if you've never done a movie before, don't try to make a 90-minute feature, you know, starring 20 characters. You know, think about logistically what you have at your in your reach. And so, like, we looked at what we had within our reach, and then we used our talent to make the best of our ability. If you're just starting out, set your expectations to there. And if you've been doing this a long time and you think that you have high aspirations and you want to do something that, like, makes an impact and you want to take to film festivals, well, treat it like any other film that's made to a film festival. And when you run a set, make sure your set is safe. Make sure that people are not going to be injured, that they're fed, that, you know, you're not forcing people to work 18 hours for free and not taking care of them. That, like, you have to take on the responsibility, become a group leader, and succumb to the responsibilities that if something goes wrong, you're going to have to pay for it and you're going to have to be responsible for it. So I think that that's a key thing. And you know, it's as much as I want to promote people going out and having fun, if you just want to go out and have fun, have fun. But if you want to make something and you want it to be production level quality, then take the responsibility, do your research, and deliver on your promises.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and I want to turn it over to you to let people know where they can find more info about you, Womp Stomp Films, and the upcoming web series.
Well, we just revamped www.wompstompfilms.com, WOMPSTOMPFILMS.com. It has all the information about the Never Hike Alone web series, about some of the other fan films that we have coming up. Some will be announced very soon, too, as well as the original projects, such as Pathos, which I talked about, Imagine, which we just released to our YouTube channel last week. All of our links to our YouTube channel, our Facebook, our Instagram, all that stuff is on the website. Also, our link to our Indiegogo, which is going on right now for Never Hike in the Snow. We're about $22,000 into it. We need to make it to $50,000. We're about a week and a few days in. I like to see those numbers tick up a little bit faster pretty soon. We're going to do a special release this Friday, a really special perk that people have been asking and dying for. And so we finally figured out a solution to making more of them, and people are going to love it. So definitely tune in on Friday for that. And then pick up a shirt, pick up a pin, pick up a poster. You can, you know, I think that one thing I want to say about the Never Hike Alone web series is you don't have to give 50 to $100 to make a big impact. If you can convince 3 of your friends to give $5 to $10, or if you yourself can give $5 to $10, and then 1,000 other Friday the 13th fans give $5,000 to $10,000. Well, that's between $5,000 and $10,000. We need to work together as a community to support each other. And I know that, you know, big things are real nice coming in. An EP coming in at $5,000 is really awesome, but we can really do a lot of damage if the fans unite and they put trust in fan films and they put trust in Womp Stomp Films to tell this story, that we're going to deliver something that, you know, you're not gonna get to see. The franchise is not gonna do this in the theater. We're doing the things that, like, we hear you, I'm a fan, and we want to make stuff for the fans, and we really believe in the story that we're telling. So, you know, we need your support. We're on Indiegogo. Our link is on our website. Indiegogo, just check out Never Hike in the Snow. We're in the film section, and we're ready to take the Friday the 13th fan film world by storm once again.
When can we expect generally release dates for these upcoming installments?
My plan is to release and then launch as we go. So if all goes to plan and we make our crowdfunding of $50,000 by October 13th, we will begin pre-production right away. We will also we'll plan to shoot December 13th, which I've heard Big Bear's already getting snow. So that's working in our favor. That means we're probably going to have a nice wet, white winter. We'll be able to get started December 13th. We'll shoot maybe 4 days. That's this production. And then we will go right into post-production after the holidays. Probably take 2.5 months to suture it all up. And then, March 13th comes around, we release. Shortly after that release, we'll count down to the Never Hike Alone 2 campaign, which will be for the first episode of the sequel side of things. And we'll generally start from there. And then that campaign will have its own unique features. We'll probably start offering, Never Hike in the Snow on Blu-ray at that point, and building perks as we go. So, you'll probably see Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, and Never Hike Alone 2 ending up on the same disc together. So we might end up pre-packaging those to raise more money for those projects.
Well, everybody certainly go out, support Womstop, support Vin, and support Never Hike Alone, because like you said, this is a fan film. We're all fans, so if we all do our part, it'll get made. It'll get made faster, and it's already been proven that they can do the quality. Now we're going to get the quantity. So I'm super excited as a fan. And again, Vin, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you for having me on, and it's been a pleasure talking to you as well.
All right, for Vincent Disanti, I'm Dylan Cloud, and this has been the Cutting Room Floor. See you guys next time.